Says the star and crescent postmarks of Egypt and Sudan. Shake your head. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we're ready. We're ready to go. Um, and good afternoon or good morning on my side. Thank you for allowing me to give this presentation. Um, my reason for presenting this topic is primarily in hopes that it will inspire a few of you to consider adding star and crescent postmarks to your collecting interests. I'm also hoping that some of you will have examples of stamps bearing these postmarks in your collections and that you'll be willing to barter or to trade with me and others, as I still have many holes in my collection and I have many duplicates. Since this is my first time presenting at the Egyptian Study Circle Zoom meeting, I will humbly take the liberty to tell you a bit about myself and my philatelic background, but only as it relates to Egypt. I've been collecting stamps since I was 12 when my parents gave me a US stamp album as a birthday present, and I've never looked back. As both a child and as an adult, my family and I traveled abroad extensively, eventually living and working in 12 different countries. I collected stamps from almost all of these countries. And yet, despite having visited Egypt on a number of occasions, I have never lived or worked there. So how did I happen to develop an interest in Egyptian philately? Sorry. The answer is Sudan, where I did in fact live and work for 5 years, from 1988 to 1993, during which time I began collecting stamps of Sudan. What interested me the most were the provisional first issues that used Egyptian stamps of the time, overprinted with the word Sudan in Arabic and French. This interest prompted me to look deeper into the relevant Egyptian stamps of that period and anything else that bore the iconic pyramid and sphinx motif. As a consequence, I have a fairly complete collection of all these types. By the way, did you know that Egyptian stamps bearing the pyramid and sphinx motif were the first postage stamps ever to illustrate an historical monument? True. In the meantime, I have performed an extensive study of the forged overprints of Sudan's provisional first issues. It is currently being updated to include over 100 different forgeries. When finished, it will be made available free of charge to members of both the Sudan Study Group and the Egyptian Study Circle through their respective websites. I also collect stamps of the Republic of South Sudan and share the position of president of the South Sudan Philatelic Society. Leo van der Velden and I have co-authored a book on the subject, which is available to members of the Sudan Study Group. I also collect Suez Canal forgeries and am in the process of conducting a study on the subject, one of many. One of my favorite areas of study are covers bearing postmarks of the Agenzia della Posta Europea, for which I have an extensive collection. I also collect interpostal seals, but primarily those related to Sudan. And finally, my favorite A favorite collection of mine is the Philatelic History of the Shepherd's Hotel in Cairo, for which I have an extensive collection of advertising covers, postcards, and fiscal stationery. And I'd be quite happy at any time to give a presentation on these subjects. So let's get back to my main presentation, which focuses on the star and crescent postmarks found on stamps of both Egypt and Sudan. I'd first like to acknowledge the considerable contributions of Brian Sedgley, who worked with me over much of the past 2 years to make this presentation possible. As you know, Brian passed away recently, and he will be greatly missed by Egypt and Sudan collectors alike. I also wish to point out that some of the postmarks in this presentation are actually cancels or crests rather than actual postmarks. Furthermore, virtually all the stamps that you see in this presentation are my own, with the exception of some covers. And finally, my apologies in advance for any mispronunciation of Egyptian names and post offices. Egypt's contemporary postal history goes back to the mid-1800s, when mail services were performed by a group of Italian entrepreneurs under the name Agenzia della Posta Europea. This relatively short-lived but highly efficient service was nationalized in 1861 and modernized to reflect global trends in postal services, such as the use of postage stamps, postage due stamps, registration, and standardized postmarks. These are examples of Posta Vice Reale Egiziane administration, which was the first official state-run postal administration to serve the general public following Posta Europea. Earlier services were limited to official correspondence. Postmarks of the 1860s and 70s tended to be entirely practical in nature and lacked any distinguishing or decorative details, achieving what is better known as a CDS, or a circular date stamp. Here are examples of postmarks on the second postal administration, Posta Khedive Egiziane, which were used in the 1870s and 80s, and which were also highly influenced by Italians. These were followed by a more internationally influenced design, which was consistently bilingual and incorporated a horizontal date bar. It is speculated that this design was applied in compliance with the Universal Postal Union guidelines. Starting in the early 1880s and for the following 20 plus years, an interesting feature appeared from time to time on postmarks of Egypt, that of a star and crescent symbol. The star and crescent postmark was introduced in 1882 and was used in fewer than 40 locations, some of them in Sudan. The last recorded use was in 1919. This phenomenon is not entirely surprising, given that the same symbol was widely used in Egyptian government circles during that period, including the national flag. And as we all know, it was also used as a watermark for many, if not most, early Egyptian postal stamps. And it also appears as an integral part of some of the early stamp designs. By the way, the Egyptian Studies Circle's webpage has a wealth of information about star and crescent postmarks, suggesting that it was not only me who find them to be fascinating, The study of Egyptian postal markings and constellations, which include star and crescent types, was first undertaken by R. Seymour Blomfield as study number 6 of the Egyptian Studies Circle. His first report was published in October of 1936. My study is largely based on star and crescent postmarks that I have collected, but also includes some that I have observed online but failed to acquire for one reason or another. Suffice to say that in the past few years, I have pored over literally tens of thousands of Egyptian stamps to achieve my understanding. Past efforts have been made to classify these postmarks according to their format. By that, I mean how the star and crescent is designed and where it is positioned in relationship to other postal features. For the purpose of this presentation and brevity, I've designed my own simplified classification system, which includes 11 different categories. Note that type 1 shows the star and crescent positioned below the post office name, which is arced along the top, while the Arabic is below and parallel to the date line. Let's see, this is another one of the same category. Type 2 is very similar, but includes a sub-post office, and the Arabic is now arched along the bottom of the circle. And by the way, all of these stamps that you see to the left are in my collection. I obviously have more than I need, so I'm always in a position to trade. Let's see. Type 3 is similar, but has English both above and below the date line. This is the one of very few examples found on an unstamped, on active service military letter sent from a British military camp located near Alexandria as part of the harbor defenses and called MEX, or Fort MEX, which accommodated soldiers returning from the Nile expedition between the 1st of August and 20th of September, 1885. Another source claims the name is derived from the word Middlesex, which is a suburb of London, and the first stands for the 1st Battalion Middlesex Regiment. Type number 4 has the star and crescent above the name of the post office. This too is quite rare, and I do not have any example in my collection. Excuse me. Type 5 is a traveling post office postmark, and the star and crescent is positioned between the names of the post offices and the word ambulant and faces east. Note that this Care Alexandria TPO postmark also includes a decorative vignette with 2 ivy branches on either side of the star and crescent. This is a rare display of Art Deco, and I'm tempted to assign a unique classification to this one. Sorry, this one. Oops. All right. Type 6 is completely inversed, with English and star and crescent below the date line. Type 7 has 2 star and crescent symbols facing each other at opposite ends of the date bar. By the way, both type 6 and 7 were, I believe, identified by Mike Murphy, and more details of these can be found in an article that he wrote in the 2022 Egyptian Studies Circle newsletter. Correct, Mike?
Absolutely.
Very good. Type 8, strictly speaking, this is not a postmark, but rather a canceller used by both the telegraph and railroad administrations. Both note that the star is located above the date while the crescent is located below. Type 9 is arguably not a star and crescent, but it has nevertheless been accepted by most of those who study these things. Note that the star is situated in a half crescent of sorts. The same applies to type 10, for which is only one known example, and I'm lucky enough to have one. And finally, type 11, which is common but is used almost exclusively as an administrative emblem or canceller. Despite having spent hundreds of hours researching this subject, I only recently identified 2 more potential star and crescent types. The first being an administrative emblem for the impeccable post-Khediviate that also contains a star and crescent dated 5 November 1887. And sorry, got to go back. And another one, the Telegraph Administration dated 11 November 1896, again with the star and crescent below Cairo. I did mention Sudan. The star and crescent postmarks of Sudan, though perhaps lacking in variation relative to their Egyptian cousins, are nonetheless fascinating in their own right. Virtually all fall into the category of type 1, where the star and crescent is situated below the name of the town, which follows the curve of the upper border. The Arabic is positioned horizontally below the segment, and the date bridge is positioned horizontally at the center. The exception is Dongola, where the star and crescent is found above the name Dongola in some cases. There are 2 distinct usages of these postmarks, the first being associated with the Nile expedition of 1884-85. There are so far just 4 known examples, and all are virtually identical in design, with the exception of Dongola, which uses slightly larger lettering. Korti and Dongola are relatively common, while Tani and Camp are limited to just a few known specimens. The Sudan star and crescent postmarks used during and shortly after the Reconquest period are also considered relatively scarce. Available literature refers to 6 locations, with Kharkoi and Gobri Khartoum being particularly elusive. A 7th location, Wad Medani, was recently found by Malcolm Coe, who is a member of both the Sudan Study Group and Egyptian Study Circle, and is in the audience this evening. This is dated 20 August 1899, which is in line with the others of this type. This one's from my personal collection and shows the letter Kartum in the date line. It is found on a genuine provisional first issue of Sudan, and it's superimposed over a genuine Wadi Halfa postmark dated August 1897, which suggests that it is not a postmark. It's the only one I am aware of, and I'd be extremely grateful if anyone else has one like this, bring it to my attention. Thank you. The next few pages are examples of star and crescent postmarks. Most, but not all, are from my personal collection. As mentioned earlier, some locations, such as Korti, used the same postmark both before and after the Reconquest period. I found these Korti postmarks superimposed on Sudan stamps, confirming their existence after 1897. Dongola, on the other hand, was used only during the Nile expedition. Khartoum is relatively common, but examples on covers can be very pricey. The Marawi star and crescent poses something of an enigma, owing to the fact that the year 1896 is most commonly shown on these postmarks, despite the camp not being under British control until mid-1897. While it's generally believed that the reason for this is a clerical mistake, it's also uncanny, in my humble opinion, that stamps bearing the correct date are virtually non-existent. I mean, how many clerical mistakes can be made before a supervisor steps in? On top is a star and crescent postmark of Edfina. Is that pronounced correctly?
Mm.
On a forged provisional Sudan stamp. You can see the Sudan here, but it is a forgery. So it makes up a very interesting forgery. In most cases, these postmarks were used sparingly and for short periods, owing to the relatively rapid advance of the British and Egyptian forces into Sudan. Some have suggested that we're dealing with a variation of a skeleton head hand stamps with removable letter and numeral slugs, designed to meet requirements as and when needed. Do we understand that? All right. Here is one recently shared with the Sudan Stamp Collectors Facebook group, which displays neither post office nor date. I've thrown in an example of two presentation pages just to illustrate that star and crescent postmarks could be used for exhibiting purposes. Based on the several hundred postmarks that I possess, I conclude that the vast majority are found on the second and third issues of Egyptian stamps bearing the pyramid and sphinx motif. This makes perfect sense given their relatively common usage throughout the 1880s and 1890s. The next most common link is postage due stamps. And while I do understand why postage due stamps were commonly used during that period, I can't say whether they were intentionally singled out for cancellation using star and crescent postmarks. Another phenomenon for which I cannot find a definitive answer is the proliferation of star and crescent postmarks on salt tax stamps. The obvious advantage to a collector here is that the stamps are large enough to contain virtually an entire postmark, making them an essential part of any collection. The dates tend to be in the mid to late 1890s. Note that the home run postmark at the bottom is uses an earlier version of the salt tax stamp. Interpostal seals are also fairly common, though much less so. These too tend to cover the period of the 1890s. From my own experience, star and crescent postmarks are almost never found on any other type of stamp. And the commemorative here bearing a Kosier CDS is a rare example and generally considered the last of the star and crescent postmarks. Note that it's dated 1914, placing it near the end of the star and crescent usage. This is my email address. If you'd like to correspond with me on this subject matter, please do make a note of this and kindly put star and crescent postmarks in the subject line. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. Amazing. Very cool. Bill, if you can stop sharing your screen. Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
And Tammy, before we move on to the next one, I'd like to take a commercial break and I'll put Sammy on the spot. Sammy, if you can give us an update on the auction. I got the email from you today that there's good progress, but just give us an update. Again, let's call this a commercial break and then we'll go to the next presentation.
So the auction's live and we've had quite a lot of interest. We've got over 500 lots of varied prices, so it should suit every taste and every pocket. And in fact, Bill, you probably will find that there's one star and crescent on it with the Suez one, if I remember correctly. Okay. Now, I've got a spare one if you need it. the Suez TPO on it, if you want one. So please bid. And the reason the auction, it's a very important point, but auction is one of the main sources for funding for the Egypt Study Circle. We charge very little compared to auction houses. We charge 5% to sellers and 10% to buyers. And so please bid. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. And on my part, with Tammy's help, as I usually do, I'll try to pick a few random lots, usually higher value ones, and promote them on the Facebook page. And in the past, and I know Mike Murphy will agree, we've gotten a few new members out of those quote unquote ads. And so I'll try to get to that. I'm a CPA in the middle of my busiest tax time of the year, but I'll try to get to that today or tomorrow. So anyway, thank you, Sammy, for that commercial break. Tammy, do you want to present to us the next presenter?
Sure. Next, Ken, are you about ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay. Ken Sanford is from Connecticut, and he has a lovely presentation he's going to give us on the Imperial Airways air crash covers, which with an Egyptian twist to it, primarily from 1924 to 1940. And I was very intrigued and couldn't wait to hear about your presentation. So take it away, Ken.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen. Okay, I don't know how to get rid of those little things on the left side, but that's all right. We can manage. I'm Ken Sanford. I worked in the airline industry for 40 years. The last position I had was with the International Air Transport Association in Geneva, Switzerland. I was there from 1975 until 1998 when I retired, and then we moved back to Connecticut in 2006. My two main collections are air crash covers of Pan American Airways and air crash covers of Imperial Airways. Imperial Airways was the British international airline that started in 1924. It was a merger of four small UK airlines that served within the UK and to the Channel Islands. One of them did. And then it became Imperial Airways 1924. And then it started serving a few cities in Europe like Paris and Zurich. And then in 1929, it expanded out to Egypt, down south to as far as South Africa, and over to India, and further eventually to Australia. So they first flights that they operated that went through Egypt were short flying boats. So they were serving Alexandria. They served Cairo later on, mostly by land planes. They never landed flying boats on the Nile that I know of. So the first crash that happened in Egypt was October 26, 1929. It was a short S-8 Calcutta, and it was landing in Mirsa Matruh, which was a fueling stop. And it hit a submerged rock and broke open the hull. And they managed to get another aircraft. The first one was the city of Alexandria. They named all the aircraft. The second, then they got another aircraft called the city of Athens, and it crashed on takeoff. So that was a bad day for them. I have a couple of covers, mostly to India. So you see this one is to Bombay, has a small two-line cachet. And this is a beautiful ambulance cover. When a badly damaged envelope is put into a post office envelope, we call that an ambulance cover. And that's the ambulance cover to Calcutta, which is really nice. And this is a label that was applied to the back of some of the covers in Bombay. The next one with the Egypt connection was the city of Rome. And that was operating to Europe. This is a nice cover from Cairo. The aircraft had engine problems and they landed on the water at La Spezia, Italy. It was towed by a ship. They were towing it into a port and a cable broke and the aircraft capsized and sank. And the covers from this are quite rare. There's only very few of them around. The next one was the you can't read the I can't read the name of it on the oh yeah, it was the city of Birmingham, sorry. And that was an Armstrong Whitworth Argosy, which was a land plane, and it crashed at Aswan, Egypt. That was coming up from Africa up through Egypt, and then it would connect at Alexandria to the flying boats. This one hit a hill on landing, it overturned and was destroyed. A mail from this is also very rare because there were no cachets applied. This was the Satiris. This was a flying boat, was going nonstop from Alexandria to Athens. So that's a nice cover from Cairo. And on a couple of these, I can't remember which one. I have a cover on the Shepherd's Hotel envelope. So Bill would be interested in that one, I'm sure. I couldn't find that one to show, but it's a beautiful cover. It's from one of these flying boats that crashed. This was landed on heavy sea and in Egypt on the Greek coast, on the Greek coast, and it was towed by a boat to Phaleron Bay. These are also very scarce. Okay, this one was operating in Burma, That was a Atalanta class Estrella. That was a land plane. And that one skidded on the runway and crashed through the boundary fence. Also covers very rare from this. And covers from Egypt have been recorded. I don't have one, but they have been recorded. This was the city of Khartoum. That was a short S-8 flying boat going from London to Australia via Alexandria. This is a nice cachet that the post office put on salvaged ex-city of Khartoum. The post offices usually used to put really pretty descriptive cachets on covers back in those days. Nowadays, they just put damage and handling or something like that. They never mention the name of the aircraft or the airline. I guess today that wouldn't be proper to do that. And this is has a black cachet applied in Egypt in English and French, which is nice. And it's also, you notice it's an ambulance cover on His Majesty's service. This was the inaugural flight of this short S-23 flying boat. It was going from Great Britain to Alexandria. And it was supposed to land in Macon, France, which was one of the stops on the way. It was bad weather, snowing. They got caught in this snowstorm and hit the top of the Beaujolais Mountains. They hit 2 trees and then landed on the edge of a pine forest. And a few years ago, when I was living in Geneva, they put up a monument for this, and I went to that celebration and erecting the monument. And I saw the 2 trees that they hit. You still see the 2 trees chopped off. And there was a French gentleman there who was a child living on a farm about a mile from the crash site. And he went with his father's box camera and took photos, and he gave me all the negatives. So this is showing the aircraft on the edge of the pine forest. Everybody was killed. There was only one passenger, a woman, and all the crew were killed except one co-pilot, and he managed to crawl to a farm about a mile away to get help. And they didn't apply any cachets to the mail, so these are quite rare. There's only a few known. This was a short S-23 flying boat, the Courtier, going from Australia to Greece and England via Egypt, crashed and landing in Phaleron Bay in Greece. This is a nice registered cover from Alexandria. And covers from this crash are fairly common. There's in the book that I published in 2003, it was Air Crash Mail of Imperial Airways. That was published by the Rossiter Trust Fund in England. We recorded over 20 different cachet varieties from this crash. So they're fairly common. This is another one from the same crash. This is a really nice cover, a Packabo cover from Port Said to England. Don't see those many very often with a Packabo cover canceled. This was another flying boat, the S-23 Cygnus, operating from Australia to Great Britain. It crashed on takeoff from Brindisi. It had stopped in Egypt and was on the way to England. This is a cover from Amman, Jordan to England, which is from Jordan is very rare. And again, from this one, there's probably 25 or 30 or more cachet varieties because it was carrying a lot of mail. This one, it ran out of fuel and the engines stopped and it dove into the water at quite some force and crashed. And I'm not sure which one it was, but it was one of these flying boat crashes that afterwards the British government required seatbelts. And up until then, they hadn't required seatbelts for the passengers. This was a land plane, the Armstrong Whitworth Atalanta class Aurora, operating from Cairo to India. These are also very rare because there were no cachets applied to the mail. This was on January 15th, 38. This was a S-23 flying boat, the Cordelia, operating from Great Britain to Egypt, and it was forced to land on the sea at La Boule, which is near Saint Nazaire, France. Again, covers they didn't get cached, so but they're quite rare. This is one from Australia to England. This is the C-class Cordelia operating from Great Britain. Oh, sorry, that was the same one. Sorry, it didn't advance to the next one. There we go. This one was a flying boat, the Corio, operating from Southampton to Athens, Alexandria, and through to the Middle East. And it collided with another flying boat when taxiing at Sharjah. And these are quite rare also. This is to England to Australia without a cachet. This one was a Lockheed Electra in December 39, en route from Alexandria via Malta to London, disappeared near Malta, and no covers have been recorded from that. So I'm sorry, but I can't show you one. This was a H-42 Hannibal class aircraft from Cairo, India, to Alexandria, disappeared near Jask, Persia, and no covers have been recorded from this. And this aircraft was nicknamed the Flying Cigar because the shape of the fuselage kind of looks like a cigar. So that is all of the covers that I have with an Egyptian connection. I just want to mention that we have a society that specializes in crash and wreck covers called the Wreck and Crash Mail Society. We publish a quarterly journal called La Catastrophe, which in French means the disaster. I'm the editor. So if anybody's interested, there's my email. You can contact me. And the original reference for crash mail, there were two of them. There was Henry Neerink, Recovered Mail. That was published by him in Belgium in 1993 and 95 in 2 volumes. That covered the world except for US and Canada. And the American Airmail Catalog volume, the 6th edition, volume 1, listed the US and Canada crash covers. And about 8 or 9 years ago, I started working on an update of both Recovered Mail and the American Airmail Catalog. And last year, we published on a flash drive a complete update of those 2 references. And it's on a flash drive, credit card size. You can pull the little thing out and plug it into your USB port. The reason we didn't publish a printed book is because it's 2,400 pages and with about 1,600 cachet and cover illustrations. So as a book, it would have been too expensive and too big to publish. So if anybody's interested in that, we sell it for $30 plus postage, and you can contact me. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions.